All right. Hello, everybody. Happy lunchtime for those of you here on the East Coast, and otherwise, happy Friday to everyone, regardless of where you are. I am Laura Sicola, founder of Vocal Impact Productions and author of Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice, plus, of course, the podcast, Speaking to Influence. And my guest today is none other than Deb Coviello, the drop-in CEO. I love that expression. And let me try that in English again. Say we all have our moments. This is clearly live, unedited, and that's why you're here, to have real-time conversation, real discussion, unfiltered, unedited, to address some of the most burning issues about communicating with the C-suite. The C-suite meaning any CXO, any of the chief officers of an organization, chief executive officer or CEO, chief financial officer, CFO, CTO, CIO, ABCD, EFG, but whoever are the senior executives that run the organization. That's the C-suite. So Deb Coviello, my guest, is the author of the book, The CEO's Compass, and she's also also a podcast. And she partners with C-level leaders to manage through their business issues and elevate their people for a positive and lasting impact. Welcome, Deb.
Oh, Laura, I am so excited for finally to have this conversation. You're a fast talker. I'm a fast talker. But what's most important is that by the time we're done today, our messages get through. So speaking the words we use and the messages, I can't wait to share some insights with your audience.
I'm so glad to have you here. And the reason in particular that I picked this topic is because in my work in leadership communication, training, and coaching, so many of the people that I work with do end up working with or reporting to the C-suite. If they're not C-suite members themselves already, many aspire to that role. And there seems to be this special little almost linguistic glass ceiling, this unique challenge in being able to communicate effectively, how to get through to people who are at that topmost tier. What is it that is required to crack the code, to get through it, and to hear the yes that we all so desperately want to hear? We put so much time and effort into the research, into the PowerPoint deck, into the proposal, into whatever else it is. And I think the people who are listening today, and I would love, by the way, to invite all of you to please put in the chat, where are you geographically, and what's your role? And what's your industry, if you'd like to share that? Are you a C-level executive yourself? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a manager, a director, a vice president, or just someone who's fresh out of college, first official job, and you're planning ahead, in which case kudos and good for you for having that kind of foresight to know that this kind of skill set is mission critical to being successful in your career and to being able to get to the top if that's where you aspire to be. So I think a lot of the people who are listening today are either, if not in the C-suite, people who report directly to the C-suite, want to be able to get through to your boss and hear that yes. Or if you're smart, it's people who report to people who report to the C-suite, because if you're trying to get through to your boss, they have to take what you give them and report it to theirs. So how to make sure that your message is evangelized appropriately so that you get that buy-in. Maybe you're an entrepreneur. Maybe you're a vendor and the C-suite is your client. Those are the decision makers in your ideal prospect. And you need to figure out how to get them to realize that you are the best partner for them, the best vendor for your product or service. Or maybe you're the client and you need to be better able to talk to your provider, and it is the person who's at the top to get better services. Or anybody else. Deb, who else would want to talk to the C-suite? Who else would want to be able to persuade someone at the C-level?
May I suggest the frontline worker? The frontline worker.
Why?
Because the frontline worker, and I have a story about that, is closest to your client or your customer.
Why?
And if we don't equip them
okay,
with the language to be able to articulate issues or concerns that are closest to your customer, for them to be able to do the job, to deliver the product or service, they now need an ability, a code, to be able to articulate issues and risk to the C-suite. It is not just for the aspiring C-suite leader. Everybody needs a vehicle, a better way to take information, to be able to articulate it in a language that people understand in terms of risk and opportunity. And then ultimately, what is the benefit or the risk to the business? Everybody needs a little bit of this to be able to communicate messages, not just information. So that, again, I usually go against the grain, but I think everybody can leverage some insights, even if it's a frontline worker.
You just said something that I think is really important, the idea of communicating messages, not just data or not just information. So, can you explain a little bit what does that mean?
So, one of the things that I find this over and over again, we train our people, our subject matter experts, to be able to dot I's and cross T's and get their data and their charts into the PowerPoint looking a particular way. And there is so much time spent on just the information versus thinking about the human connection of how do we resonate this information to make a human connection, not just disseminating information. We train them, and we do need to train them well to deliver information because that's how we make key business decisions. But that's only the point of entry. What we need to do is be able to teach them to be able to take that information and convert it into what is the risk or opportunity ahead of us. It's not all bad news, but what are the opportunities? And then what is the impact or magnitude? Because we need to connect with people. Is it risk, urgent, survival instincts kick in, or opportunity, like tell me more? So you want to pull people in to listen because people will glaze over with information. And then how are they impacted? The what's in it for me? You need to be able to articulate that in their language in order to connect with people, not to share information.
And that's something that I think people struggle a lot with because we hear so often, well, you have to speak their language. How can people who've never been there know what that language is? What are some tips that will, or just general frameworks or angles to take that helps people who've never been to C-suite land to learn to speak the language?
I mean, it all just starts with a question, either that you can ask to participate. I'd love to listen or sit in on that webinar, or maybe just have a one to one with that senior leader. Sometimes there are open door policies by which somebody could say, hey, I'd love to know a little bit more about what you do and what's important. And just sometimes through listening and translating in your head, well, what are they saying? They're saying top line growth. Okay, that's getting a customer to sign a contract, and start translating between what they say and what does it mean to me. I mean, right now I'm working with a client in the banking industry, and I don't understand all that they do, but when I translate it into my language of manufacturing, then I say, oh, now I know what they're talking about. And then little by little, I start using the words and phrases to resonate. Because again, like I said before, it's about connecting. And if you're speaking Greek and I'm speaking Russian, we're never going to make a human connection to influence.
Yes, it looks like that's resonating. Gina mentioned that that's a great point about it being an art form. And so much of communication is at that really sensitive balance between art and science. Yes, there are technicalities that you need to remember, things to avoid, et cetera. But there's always that from person to person distinction where emotional intelligence comes into play, where situation and context is important, and being able to navigate the art half of it, which is really frustrating for people who like clear black and white answers. How do I do it? Give me the footprints on the floor so I can learn to foxtrot by following the exact footsteps and going from there.
Yes, and let me add to that art form, and thank you for that question or that comment out there. There's a little bit about the chameleon effect, where you can start then assuming or learning or using the language so you seem like everybody else. You're part of the fabric, you're part of the team and the culture. That's a step in the direction of people listening to you. But what I also caution is don't lose yourself in becoming like everybody else. And yes, you need certain words and phrases that resonate in that context, but also stand out. Stand on your own feet, have your own talking points or your unique ideas. So while you're trying to sound like the language of business or what everybody else is saying, make sure you interject some of your unique thoughts because you got their attention and now you want to draw them in.
And that sounds like it's part of the difference between having a message versus just information to share. And I think that one of the common challenges that a lot of my clients face, and you can tell me if this is something that you see from either end of the conversation, is that people spend so much time putting together all the data and doing all the analysis that when then presenting to the C-suite, they feel like they need to justify any assessment or any assertions that they're going to make. They want to prove how hard they've worked. They want to prove how much knowledge they have. They feel like it's never quite enough. There's almost an imposter syndrome or a feeling of inadequacy. Like, I don't know if my argument's strong enough. I want to prevent questions. I just want you to say yes. So you drown the person in data instead of just making the assertion with a couple of key points and then allowing questions to drive the conversation from there. Does that sound common?
Yeah, so analysis paralysis holds a great thought from coming to fruition. I was an entry level quality engineer, and I knew we needed a better training program. We needed to put a program with teachers and content and process, especially for the frontline workers. I had an opportunity to stand in the C-suite, and I pulled a statistic out of my head, but I said it with such passion. I says, we need a training program. We need to equip our people because 80% of the people in this entire workforce is closest to your customer making the product. And when we don't afford them the opportunity to have a robust training program, I said, who are you hurting? So talk about a powerful message. And yes, it was the data. Was it good or bad? And what was the magnitude? Could you have checked my number? Maybe it was 60%, maybe it was 95%, but I portrayed a compelling message for which at the end of the day, they gave me the okay, and I implemented that regional wide training program. So don't be so worried about being perfect, but have a compelling message.
Interesting. And that's, I'm sure, difficult, a difficult pill to swallow for many people. The idea of presenting to the C-level, don't worry about being perfect. Like, how is that possible to reconcile the two? For those who are really afraid of having the imperfection be the point of focus, what's your advice?
So there's always a caveat to things that I say. So read the fine print. I want to get the message across. Don't worry about being perfect. Now, there are certain cultures that you better make sure every one of those numbers in that spreadsheet is absolutely correct because they may pick apart the information and then you go down a rabbit hole and never get to the opportunity to present the message. Check your work, exercise your craft, but then make sure when you're having that data, there's a thing along the bottom say, this is what I want you to get out of this. Here's the message. And if you want to, you can dig into the data for the people that want the data, but always have the message. Here's the data. Here's what we need to do. And here's what I want you to take away. Lead with the message, and then you can go into the details later.
There you go. There you go. And speaking of questions, we want to answer yours. So anybody out there, whether you're with us on LinkedIn or on YouTube, we've got a couple of different live channels going. Please feel free to ask your questions, share your comments if you have a story. I don't think this is a platform where we're able to actually bring you in and have you communicate with us, but we would love to know what your questions are. So in the chat, in the comments, by all means, do ask. So a question is, how much data should you provide? Is that a question you can generally ask, or how do you gauge what that number should be?
Interesting. You don't want too much data. I mean, I would say if you have a PowerPoint, it's maybe only a third of the screen, enough that they can read it. Because you don't want people squinting. Again, that detracts from your message, but not so much that it's an eye chart that you're going to be spending going through every lineup. Yes, there are data and tables that may be lines and lines of code deep, but summarize. That is an art form, is to be able to distill it into the high level buckets, 3 columns, 3 rows, whatever it might be, and then your bullet points next to it. Again, I'm not here to teach about the finer points of a PowerPoint to get a message, but sometimes less is more powerful. It's about, yes, the image to project what you're talking about, 3 talking points, but they want to be focused on you and your message, not what's on the PowerPoint.
Right, right. And you want them to be focused on you, not on your slides. The analogy that I like to use when I'm doing these kinds of trainings for client groups is that you and your slides should have a Gladys Knight and the Pips relationship, meaning one of you is going to be the star in the spotlight and the other is just going to be backup, visual support, maybe some audio or other background context and things. But most people create slides that are so dense and so, to use your phrase, make you squint just to see what's there, that it demands the audience's sustained attention to go, what is all that? And then I'm going to mix my metaphors here, become Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. If you remember all those old Peanuts cartoons. So they're not listening to you at all. They're too busy trying to figure out what they're looking at on the slide. So you have relegated yourself to pip status. You're just background. and your slides become Gladys Knight. They're the star of the show. This is not a good place to be. You're trying to present yourself as the authority. You want to be in the spotlight. You want to be able to have them look at the slide, get the gist of it, and then turn to you as the authority for more information from there. So, we want to figure out how to do that. And if you find yourself, and you can tell me, Deb, if you second this motion, but one of my pet peeves is when I'm watching someone present and they have a slide that is that like 8-point font, sometimes literally 8-point font. How obnoxious is that? There should never be 8-point font on a slide. And if you as the presenter are prefacing, a slide pops up and the first thing out of your mouth is, well, you probably can't see this, but that's what I call an ego slide. You put that in there to CYA, frankly, pardon my French, to cover your ass, feeling like you need to put in all this information just to prove to yourself that you've done it, but it's really not for them. If they can't see it, why waste your time and theirs? Give them something that they can see, that they can understand, that's directly useful. All right, I'm off my soapbox. What's your thought?
My reaction to that also is it shows a bit of lack of confidence. The more data that you have on the slide, it means you need to leverage it, lean on it. It's that thing that is supporting you. So the more data there, you're probably going to read it. I once gave a presentation. I had too much data and I was referring to it and I could see the body language leaning away. However, that I gave a talk. I had my talking points probably written on my hand or an index card, and it was just me. A little bit more risky. I could forget something, but I was actively engaged delivering the message. They were all on me. And it also shows a sense of confidence that you know your information, you know your facts, and you're able to articulate the message and communicate. Again, some cultures need the PowerPoint as backup and reference, but to your point, it's all about you.
Yes.
And the connection.
Yes. Now, you've used the word culture a couple of times. When you talk about cultures that need the data, cultures that need this or that, what's your definition of culture in that context?
In that context, it is industries, though all industries have this, is risk aversion. And there may be risk in what you do in servicing your customers. There may be additional layers of risk from regulating body. And depending on what you deliver, impact on humans. And so I came up from the flavor and fragrance industry for which things are consumed or applied. And not only if you made a mistake, you could hurt the brand, but worse, you could hurt people. And so anything like also a transactional industry, et cetera, those that have higher levels of risk and layers of approvals, you will find people more timid. You will find more data because they don't want to make a bad decision. And so that culture, which is created from that ecosystem, can hold people back from their greatest potential of delivering messages for influence, versus they have to rely on the data because they need the data to back them up so they're never caught in making a bad decision. That's the culture based on the ecosystem that they happen to be in.
Yes, and by the way, we've got some great comments in the chat as well, both on YouTube and on LinkedIn Live. So the comments as far as the pressure of perfection is, I think that's hitting home with a lot of people out there. So know that you are not alone. If pressure to be perfect is something that you struggle with, we understand you, we hear you, and feel free to continue to ask those kinds of questions. Now, when you think about the mistakes that people tend to make when trying to persuade the C-suite, what are some of the biggest mistakes? I mean, we just hit one as far as too much data. What's another example of a pitfall to avoid, a common mistake to not make?
Not making a proposal, not coming forward with your unique ideas, being scared to put your step forward, because ultimately also out of this, not only are we trying to influence change, but we're also trying to position you to be seen, heard, and respected, and ultimately maybe not pursuing the C-suite, but being in the C-suite. So that holding back, we talk about the glass ceiling, we talk about that perfection element. Your own mindset can be holding you back from being your best, from being the best that you can be. So always, whenever you're trying to influence, share information, but also put your unique proposal, even if it's controversial, out there. We don't take risks on ourselves. However, how are we ever going to influence? A bit of a mindset.
Yes, yes. And the holding back, I find that a lot of people that I speak with, especially those who would self-identify as introverts or otherwise as shy, and introversion and shy are not synonymous, although we like to use the word introvert as a more educated, sophisticated term for shy. They're not the same thing. But for those who self-identify as either, there's often the feeling of, well, I don't want to contribute to a discussion until I've worked out the whole answer completely and I'm sure of my answer. And I think that people forget that the whole point of a conversation is to contribute a piece to the puzzle, not that you should singularly and single-handedly come up with the perfect idea. But you add your thought, and others may say, well, this part's interesting, but that part won't work because of X, or we've tried that. And okay, so they don't embrace 100% of it and give you a ticker tape parade for having the perfect response. Did your idea trigger something in somebody else that then triggers an idea in somebody else? And little by little, you co-construct a solution to the situation. I think it's about being a part of the solution, not coming up with it perfectly your own on your own. Does that sound similar?
Yeah, and what has happened in the process, whether it's the perfect thing or maybe they enrich the conversation or what you propose, you become a facilitator of conversation. So when the next thing happens and they're putting together a new initiative or project, they might say, let's bring Deb in, let's bring Laura in, because she's good at facilitating conversation. She put forth a concise message, and then she was able to ask questions or navigate, put things up on the whiteboard. It's what you're being known and seen for. Again, data is important. Your message is important, but then how people perceive and see you. Again, maybe some other people are more articulate than you are, but what have you enabled for the C-suite? Then you become seen as valuable, maybe as a change agent or facilitator. And there are more things that I caution people, but this is a great conversation. May I jump in and share another mistake that I have seen?
Please.
Okay, you and I love to talk. We can articulate, we can talk and talk and talk. There are many people that can talk a lot. But what I would say,
Not
and
say
this is
much.
what I would say is actually silence is better. One of the things I propose when we make a mistake is sometimes we like to fill the silence with
Mm.
information and words, and it only creates noise. When you make your proposals, make sure that you also spend time and build in listening and listening to what the room or the people are saying, listening to their words, assimilating, anticipating, and thinking. And one of the greatest things for influence, I'll say, is speaking less and listening more. Because then when you are able to take in the room and the temperature of the room and what people are feeling, the ability to reframe and then come forth with a proposal, a solution, a response, again, that's influence. So silence is actually a superpower of yours. Listen more and speak less. You will be more influential.
Finding that balance, right? For those who tend to err on the side of, when in doubt, I just keep talking. Nature abhors a vacuum. Any silence is uncomfortable silence. I must fill the silence at all costs. Those of you, let's come into there. Take that breath, sit with the silence. You are not solely responsible for filling all of it, nor does anyone want you to. But of course, those of you, as we addressed in the previous point, if you already gravitate to silence more often than not, disregard what was just said. That was not evidence for you or justification for you to stay quietly and be like, oh, see, Deb said I should stay quiet. Quiet is better. No, you were already too quiet. Come out. So somewhere in the middle, the idea, if I'm understanding where this balance is, Deb, it's really about finding the balance that allows you to be viewed as a valuable contributor.
Absolutely. And another thing with that is that when you do speak, even though I'm sure you're very smart and talented, you have so much information, you are the expert. Picking less words to communicate your message is more powerful because I could speed up. I'm from the East Coast, you're from the East Coast. We could put all kinds of words in there. But when we slow down what we're saying in order to say, this is important, this is why it's important, this is the risk, this is the magnitude, you give people time to process the information, to be able to listen to you and you be heard. So slow it down.
Yes.
And if they engage in conversation and you banter and brainstorming, then you could speed it up a little bit. But messaging needs to be slow and concise at the level that it's comfortable for others.
I think that's the key, is the level that's comfortable for others. There's something often salespeople refer to it, linguists will refer to it, matching and mirroring. The idea that if you know that the person you're talking to is someone who is very pensive, very thoughtful, likes to take in a lot of information, and they're going to let you know what they think as they come to it. then you don't want to come in the way I opened this initial conversation, just, straight 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds and full speed ahead, full on energy, because they're going to just go, okay, I don't know what you're on, but don't do it again. That's not, no, I'm not connecting with you. It's not resonating. I already am not comfortable. So the odds of me being open to hearing, understanding, receiving, and agreeing with whatever you're saying, you're already behind the 8 ball. So check that. And same with the other side. If you're someone who tends to be a little softer spoken, a little slower on things, a little more hesitant, but you're trying to pitch somebody who's like, come on, come on, come on. I got stuff to do. Give me your idea. I need to go. Do you know it or not? Do you have an idea or not? If not, figure it out and come back, because I don't have time for you to figure out what your own point is. It can be hard to balance that. But when in doubt, start by reading your audience, or ask somebody else if you've never met them before, what's that person like? What's their energy level? And try to go in with that to begin with. That matching and mirroring, people feel comfortable with people who somehow are like them. And it's a little strange, but it's really powerful.
You brought up such an amazing point. We've been talking about when you show up, how to articulate and communicate a compelling message for influence. But sometimes that is, like I said, the tip of the iceberg. That 30, 10 minutes, whatever you have in front of the C-suite should be just a small part of the whole thing. Preparation is key. And I too recently I'm going into a very difficult meeting this coming Monday. And I asked a lot of questions. Tell me more about the people. What are their pain points? Why are they coming to this meeting? I didn't invite them, but somebody forwarded the message. Look for context, understand, be able to anticipate the pain points or concerns. So when you do show up, if not already in the content that you present and message, you're ready. Be ready, because you want to be confident, or be that person that it can at least respond or say, that's a great question, I'm not sure. Being able to field the information also shows leadership capability, and they recognize that as necessary. And again, you become more attractive and potentially somebody that can influence other conversations.
Yes, yes, influence. And that's why we're all here. It's all about influence, persuasion, influence, sales, pitching. There's a great question in the chat from Callista about advice for nonprofits who are in a very interesting situation, because the executive director, or whoever is the head of a nonprofit, if they are or perhaps not at the head, if you're the development director or something, you get to talk to C-level executives at companies, maybe because you're asking for support. It's a fundraising opportunity. You're asking for sponsorship for an event. So when you have the meeting, which is an opportunity to make the ask, where do you balance that talking versus silence? Because if this is your only shot, you can't afford to be too quiet, or you miss your chance.
Interesting. Silent versus speaking. Again, that may be a little bit of the art form and some of the experience. I do find that whoever you are going to for an ask, they need to be heard. They need to be understood. So I think the balance is more of a 60-40. They may need to speak more so that they are understood, because maybe you did have an ask, but once you understand and hear their story a little bit more, you're processing new data like, ooh, I was going to ask for this amount of money, but ooh, maybe I can ask for more, or maybe there's something else we should be doing together to collaborate before I go for the ask. So I even do this when I interview people. And again, it's the same situation. Listen just a little bit more to understand where they're coming from, so that you can hone your message, your ask, or how to collaborate. That's my thought on that.
Yes, yes. And I think, once again, checking in with your audience, what's the initial vibe you get from them? Are they talkers? Or are they listeners naturally? If you walk into someone's office and you're there to have a meeting to make the ask, and they say, "So, tell me about your organization." I don't know if they'd say that or not, but hypothetically, tell me about you. What brings you here today? And then they stop talking. Be ready to talk, but then stop and ask. There's only so
Engage.
much. Engage. Yes.
Yeah, the key to that is the word engage, because I often will go into rooms, they don't know me, and they are quiet. So, yes, tell about yourself, state your ground. This is the perfect opportunity for them to get to know you, but don't tell them the whole story, the 5 to 8 minutes, because you're going to lose that opportunity. And you might say, what have you experienced the same? And start the conversation. So you might talk for 3 minutes, they talk for a minute. It's this dance back and forth to pull out, get information, and start building that trust. So if they're quiet, Yes, share, because you're trying to make them feel comfortable with you so they can trust you. And then ask them a question, because sometimes people that may be shy or not comfortable want to be asked, and then they'll come forth with what you ask them.
Yes. Yes. And I almost feel like sometimes you're almost better off once you've given the initial framing for why you're there and what your purpose is, your organization, like your cause, whatever, that it's almost more effective to, I think a lawyer might refer to it as leading the witness. And
Mhm.
if you can ask questions that will get them to give you the answers that you need, and sometimes answer their own questions or whatever question you would have asked them or they would have asked you, have them answer it for you. You know, what connects you to this? Or have you ever had pets? Or do you know anyone who's died from cancer? Do you know any, whatever, get them to tell you their story. I
Yes.
mean, how many times have you heard about, general stereotypes in networking events where you find someone, you introduce yourself, they talk for 10 minutes, you say nothing, and then they leave at the end of the day and they're going, boy, love talking to you. You were a great conversation listener. Thinking, I had said all of 3 words, but you let them talk and they loved hearing you talk. Are they somebody who likes to share their life experience? Okay, if you can, again, just lead the details of that life experience to be whatever's going to connect with their heart. Because if I'm not mistaken, as a nonprofit, the heart is directly connected to the brain, which is directly connected to the wallet. So you need to be able to hit those 3 pieces there, and probably
Mhm.
heart straight to wallet. You can bypass brain for a lot of it if you make the pitch well enough. So now there's an interesting question also about, how do you know if the executive is listening or
I
not? What are some cues you can read, verbal or nonverbal?
So I see executive leaders zone in and zone out during a presentation or a conversation. You have to maintain trust with that individual, because the worst thing that you could do is say, "So, what do you think?" And then you caught them off guard and they will scramble and be in a difficult position. But I have found what you can do is, they're zoning out. What you can do is like, "Hey, Jeff, I know this topic we were just talking about, how the strategic partners are no longer aligning with us. What is your view?" What you do is you bring them back in and give them context, because when a leader has a little bit of context and knows what you're talking about, then they can immediately jump in and give their view. You never want to embarrass them. If they're not listening, call on them to say, "We're talking about such and such, and we're struggling with this issue. Do you have any opinion on that?" You've brought them back in. You saved their butt, and then they perform. But you've built a little bit of trust right there, and that also is one of those hidden things to be able to influence the C-suite. Build trust with them in awkward situations.
Nice. And nobody likes those awkward situations. So if you can sort of dig them out, give them a little exit out the side door, that's something that's always appreciated. And please, everybody out there, feel free to continue. We'll have some time in another 5 or 10 minutes in case there's people who like to wait to the end to ask questions. But anything else that you would like to ask, please don't hesitate. For those of you who like, we talked about earlier, gee, should I ask the question? Is it the right question? Is it not the right questions? There are no wrong questions. Nobody's being evaluated. And chances are, whatever question is in your mind, somebody else also has. And they will thank you greatly from the bottom of their heart, silently in the chat or otherwise, for asking it when either they hadn't fully formed it themselves or didn't quite have the courage to pull the trigger and enter it in the chat. So you'll be contributing to that discussion.
I had another thought that I want to talk to you about that
Please.
you brought up way in the beginning as you were introducing this concept about, there's this glass ceiling, how do we get beyond it? How do we crack the code, being able to influence the C-suite? And I just want to pause there. There's a little bit of a mindset shift that I'm sure that you coach people,
Excellent.
that a lot of what I believe is that, yes, there is a language and a way to communicate to get your message
Mhm.
across. But I would prefer that you not think about it in terms of a glass ceiling, that it's
Right.
something that you cannot get beyond, because it's sometimes often artificially imposed upon yourself that you don't have the ability. You are smart, you are talented, you are here for a reason, and ultimately to leave your impact on others, not just heads down. So most of it is just acknowledge that you want to be able to message the C-suite and taking the first step to engage with somebody to get content like this or individual coaching to be able to articulate what you're already good at and be able to message it. So make sure your mindset is in check. It's not that difficult. It's on you to take that first step.
Yes. Yes, couldn't agree more. That initiative is something that a lot of people tend to be very afraid of. That first step is a doozy kind of a feeling, not wanting to make a mistake, not wanting to do it wrong, but need to take it. And speaking of which, prior to taking that first step, is there any kind of pre-work that someone can do? If you know you're going to have this meeting with this person, you need, whether you're a client or a nonprofit or a vendor or a direct report, what can you do in advance? Is there some sort of, we talk often about things like socialization of messages,
Yeah.
or what is that? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's really great. And again, I am with a new client right now that I don't totally understand all the players and all of the culture. So, great speaking topic. Again, what if you dot your I's, cross your T's? The content is perfect. You talk with your boss. Yep, we're ready to go. You got your messaging. But there is always a hand grenade. There is always the unexpected. And so, key, and I'm glad you brought this up, is that find some interested parties or stakeholders who are in that area that would provide you some valuable feedback on, again, even something as simple as the template that you use. You're not using the branded information. People will nitpick that. Or they may bring information from a project 2 years ago that left a bad taste in people's mouth. You might want to change the words a little bit. They will save the day and from you having your message getting lost. So socialization, circulating your content, getting it out there to a few people that have your back, very critical, and it will maybe even enhance your message.
Excellent. And so both getting the information and to help with pre-selling the content, but also even the format and the delivery and little elements like that. Anybody who knows who that person is can only be useful in helping you gain more insight, which will help you be more successful.
And so I will let you know, this takes years of practice and learning because I have delivered presentations where I dotted I's, crossed T's, and then crickets.
Hmm.
No engagement, no conversation. And then I start questioning and losing my confidence. What did I do wrong? I delivered the information and then nobody engaged with it. It's because sometimes, like you say, we don't teach people to present information, ask clarifying questions, get people involved in the conversation, because ultimately we're trying to connect with people and move the business or activity forward. So
Yeah, yeah, and
takes
is
years.
from I'm curious, from those experiences that you had where there were those crickets, which is what everybody fears more than anything else, um, what did you learn from it? Or did you get any feedback? More than what did you learn? Were you able to get any direct feedback? And if so, how did you get the feedback?
Oh, that is another whole entire LinkedIn Live about feedback because I asked a trusted colleague outside of my main area. And what they did say was, you need to work on your presence. Not that I looked bad or anything like that. They said that when you show up in a room, be consistent in your messaging that yes, you present this information, but what are the things that you stand for that when they talk about Deb, when you're not there, she talks about this, she talks about risk, she talks about protecting consumers. That will always be there. Now, mind you, I didn't understand it. I
Mm.
wasn't shown examples on how to um, exhibit this behavior, and I didn't have a mentor to help evolve that. So, one of the things that I find is that whenever you're trying to evolve these new skills, ask a lot of questions, have a few mentors or coaches, and have people not tell you just what to do or send you to a course to learn that new skill, but somebody that's going to coach you along the way until that skill is evolved and has an impact.
Yes, yes,
So,
and
yes.
mentorships are huge, whether it's formal or informal. I think people feel like a mentor needs to be a formally codified, signed on the dotted line relationship, and I don't generally get the sense that that's the case. I mean, I have a couple of business mentors myself, and there's never been a discussion of, "Will you be my mentor?" or "Would you like me to be your mentor?" But there are people who, if I have a question about topic A, B, or C, I know exactly who I'm going to. They're always there. They will always give me feedback. They'll always give me either a kick in the pants or a supportive hug or, words of wisdom of one sort or another, but they know what I need. I know they're not going to sugarcoat it, and their hearts are there for me. You don't abuse those relationships, you use them judiciously, but when you find those people, don't worry about, are they officially your mentor? In my mind, that person is my mentor. So that's all that matters as far as I'm concerned. Is Do you find that's
Absolutely. I mean, I meet with a person on social media on a weekly basis. We develop the content. What's the theme? What are our goals? And then she has one of these. Can we talk, Deb? I see you struggle with this. I think you need to do this. Okay, I will do that. So I would say that you should be open to the universe, that it doesn't necessarily need to be a close colleague, somebody that's older than you. I've even gotten great mentorship from people that are younger than me. So be open to the possibility wherever that information or support is going to come from.
Yes, yes, openness. And sometimes the information may not be what you want to hear. You may not like the answer that you get. So you have to figure out what to do with that, or at least try to understand better what's motivating that particular
Absolutely.
frame of reference. But to understand, you may not always get what we want to hear. We get the
Mhm.
questions, um, the opportunity to ask them, but there's no guarantee on the other end of it. I wanted to. We've touched on the culture, the question of culture a couple of times, and I wanted to just circle back to that because often when I'm running trainings, in particular for women's groups and some others, that when we talk about elements like you had addressed at the very beginning, as far as being able to get to the point and being able to be more linear on certain things, that there is often pushback from that. Such assertions are either culturally insensitive or holding on to certain biases that what's the right word? Okay, my English is failing me at the moment, but put that evaluate some personal and cultural styles as being better than others, because some people are very to the point, give it to me in 2 sentences or less kind of a thing. I don't bother with it. And there are other individuals as well as cultures. And some people would argue that the women tend to gravitate more in the other direction as well, of trying to give more context, give more background, give more details to and sort of work around it, and then eventually get to the point so that you understand where it's coming from. That um some people be more extreme and claim that it is more misogynistic or at least sexist to say no, you have to, or that you're disadvantaging other cultures that tend to be more global in their communication style, to say no, if you want to talk to the C-suite, you have to be this way. That it's promoting a sort of white male Americano type of approach. What would you say to them?
In how to approach that, knowing that there are these differences. I mean, it's ultimately up to you. What is your goal? You're trying to make an impact, you're trying to influence whatever that demographic is. And while the message on that PowerPoint is still static, it is what it is that you need to get across. You are always massaging your message and how it's delivered. So, for instance, in Asian culture, you can share the information and they will shake their heads. And again, but there is a culture of obedience and respecting the teacher and the messenger, whereby maybe they prefer more breakout sessions to discuss the topic, share the insights, ask them to have questions, and then come forth. Ultimately, you have to find ways, but don't ever let it hold you back. Don't judge the culture. Ultimately, it's about getting the message across in a way that resonates with them. And yes, I know different cultures. I have to be very concise, get to the point, and then spend time of conversation. And if the demographics wants more touchy, feely, closeness, bonding, I'll move away from the PowerPoint and I'll start walking around the room to the best I can, because they want to make a connection with me and ultimately, again, engage in conversation, what have you. So you're always reading the room and being able to modify the message to what you want to do.
I think as we get into higher and higher positions, we can choose to lead and encourage others to take on our personal styles. But it is very much the play to your audience kind of idea. If you're talking to somebody who likes all the details and the context, be ready to give it to them. If you're talking to someone who doesn't and you need their buy-in, then we have to. It's a skill in knowing, can you just get to the point, or can you give the detail and tell the story when your audience requests it. And many people are not good at the other way.
And at the end of the day, if you're listening out there, you have to find something that's comfortable for you. If you're shy, if you've never been front and center, if you're humble, that's okay. Just pick out what Laura or myself are sharing that resonates with you and create a plan for yourself. Again, maybe you show up shy, but you can start and walk up, hello. Do it in your own way. What I would also say is find ways to ground yourself. What are situations for which you are energized and all of a sudden you're quiet here, but you're out here? Find ways to create that environment so when you do show up, your excitement, your expertise, and your messaging shines. Find what works for you. Pick the best of the experts, and you will find your way.
Yes. And I think it's also just important to be able to get to the point fast, regardless, because so often, two things. One, the higher up you go, the more people are putting demands on your time.
Yes.
And so the shorter the attention span based on calendar allotment and whatever
Yeah.
else that the people at the top have, and the fact that whoever, as you're presenting up, they are going to need to take some element of your message and relay it to somebody else. So if you don't give them the soundbite to relay, they're going to have to sort of figure it out on their own. And it can become like playing telephone as a kid. If you remember, the whisper down the lane, and person A says this message, whispers it to person B, who whispers it to person C. And by the time you get to whoever's last, the message that they heard doesn't really resemble the one at the beginning, the
Yeah.
original. So if you give too much information and hope that or not too much necessarily, but if you can't take all the information that you have given and say, here's the ultimate message, what all this means is important because of this. Here's what you need to know. If you can't remember everything else I say, please remember this. That's the piece that will get moved on. Otherwise, you're going to leave it to their attention, interests, whatever, to take and distill it for themselves. And it is less likely to be the message that you
Mhm.
wanted it to be.
And if I could add to that,
Please.
one or two things can happen from that. First of all, distill your messages. I'm making a proposal to make this change to our process because we're going to gain 30% efficiency. That's a message, and they can relay that. But what is even more important is, hey, at our next staff meeting, can we invite Deb over because she has this really great message about how we can increase efficiency by 30%.
Mm.
You also want to be the person that's invited to the table.
Yes. Yes. And I think most people have also been, well, I'll say screwed in the situations where they are prepared for a 20-minute presentation, and it's the, 3 or 4 hours worth of people presenting different things. And some people just go a little too long. And then all of a sudden you're last, you're supposed to have 20 minutes and they gave you 5. Or you're supposed to have 5 and they gave you 2. Whatever it is. Now, guess what? 75 or more percent of all the stuff you were going to share, you can't. So you have a really important choice to make. What's the last 10 to 20, 25% that is what they must hear? And what's the other stuff that's going to be left on the editing room floor? Because if you just start at the beginning and keep going until they say time's up, the decision will be made for you. And my guess is that what gets through is not going to be the most important piece. You have to be able to make those judgment calls on the fly. And the more you are able in advance, if you know what those key messages are going to be, you can lead with those and go from there.
Because ultimately, what you want to do is be invited to the table. If you've got 2 minutes to say, here's my proposal, here's the risk of doing nothing, here's the impact if we make this particular change. I've got data in this deck. I would love to continue the conversation with you. And they schedule one-on-ones with you afterwards. Ultimately, again, you want the time to articulate and evolve the message.
Yes. So we've hit that topic on the last 2 or 3 comments that Deb just made. So I want to drive it home for everybody else. Let's get to our point, which is your goal is to be invited to the table, to be invited back to the table. So in your persuasion, maybe in that particular conversation, you're not going to get the dotted line signature. Maybe the goal is just to move the needle. Everything that I teach is about mastering the 3 C's, the ability to command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal. And the closing the deal doesn't have to be about a monetary exchange commitment there. It can just be about moving the needle forward, getting to that next yes, getting to an agreement about what the next step should be. And maybe it's, let's have a follow-up conversation. Are they going to extend that invitation to you to come back to the table and continue to be a contributor who's recognized as an important part of this team or of this project? So final thoughts, Deb?
Now, I just love that summary. I find that messaging and connecting with people is your greatest power. Use it, because that will be what gets you in the room, gets you to the table to be able to communicate your messages. The data, the work that you do, we celebrate it, but how you connect with people is most important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO. How can people learn more about you? How can they connect with you? If there's anything you want to give or any invitations you want to extend?
Best way. Thank you, Laura. This has been an amazing experience. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today. dropinceo.com is my website for the Drop In CEO podcast, my book, The CEO's Compass to Get Back on Track, my blog post, but also connect with me, direct message me on LinkedIn, Deborah Coviello, the Drop In CEO. I'd love to have a conversation and see how we can support each other.
And part of getting through to people, I'm going to extend the invitation for both of us, which is that if you do reach out on LinkedIn, please tell us that this is where you connected with us. And whether you're watching on YouTube or on LinkedIn Live, tell us, saw you and Laura talking, or saw you and Deb talking on the LinkedIn Live, loved the topic, want to connect. You don't have to tell us you love the topic, but just let us know that this is where you saw us. Because I know if I understand why someone's connecting with me or how they discovered me, then I'm going to say yes. Whereas if it's just a random, then it's not, because I don't just collect connections like I'm going to win a prize at the skee ball booth if I've got enough tickets. It's the value of the connection is what's most important. So please let us know that this is where you came from. And similarly, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would love to have you to check out the website also, vocalimpactproductions.com, or for the podcast and my book, speakingtoinfluence.com. And from there, reach out. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all so much for your questions, for your comments, for your conversation, your connection, your engagement. And we'll look forward to seeing you here next time on the next LinkedIn and YouTube Live. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Holly, I think we're set.